In this video, I'm going to introduce you to a few programming principles in Kotlin and show you side by side how we're going to be using learning resources rather than a traditional textbook in this class. So right here, I'm on my REPL where I've been writing my code, and whenever we run it, it prints it over here on the right-hand side. Not too exciting, but it's your first line of code, so that's a bit of a little victory. On the second tab up here, I have kotlinlang.org. And this is the official website for the Kotlin language, which every programming language, or at least most of the larger programming languages, have an established website that you visit that has documentation and resources and things like that. So if I go to this Learn button right here, there are tons of different resources for you to learn Kotlin with. And I would really highly recommend that you go through these pages, and in fact, some of your assignments are to use details from these pages to complete some work. I'm not going to be able to cover everything in this class. There simply isn't enough time in a short online class like this. So it's important for you to be able to use a resource like a reference, like documentation, to kind of suss out how to solve a problem. For example, I don't know anyone in computer science or development or designers who just have the language entirely memorized. Despite television shows where they show programming happening at lightning speed and people just knowing these things off the top of their head, that simply isn't true. Really, the best programmers in the world, the best developers in the world, know how to use documentation and they know how to use references really, really, really well. They know how to look at a source and say, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? I'm trying to make this, let's say this button clickable. What do I need to do to accomplish that goal? And they know how to look it up in a resource like this. So a lot of this class is me kind of showing you side by side how to use a resource like this and how to use a resource like a teacher, or Stack Overflow or things like that, and pull those together to really solve your issue. So at the very beginning, there's a bunch of documentation here, and in fact, right here, there's the basics. There's also a few courses that you can take that are free and some that cost money. And obviously you're in a course right now. I wouldn't recommend doing any of those, but maybe if Kotlin is something that really piques your interest later, and remember this is a design class, but if Kotlin piqued your interest and you wanted to go full on development, maybe you could play around with some of these boot camps. I've done plenty of those over time. Personally, I don't have a computer science degree, but I've learned development through sources like this. So I'm just going to click this basics button right here where they talk about how to write functions, how to write variables, how to write comments, string templates, all kinds of things. So let's walk through some of this together, and in particular we're going to talk about comments and variables, and I want you to play around with these for your first assignment, which is going to be writing a little biography using print commands, variables, and comments together. So I'm going to use all of that here. So the first thing to talk about is what exactly is going on here. We have this word print, ln, and then in parentheses we have a piece of text that is surrounded by quotes. What we're telling this here is to execute a function called printLine or println, and then we're feeding that function some parameters or some arguments. And in this case, we're telling it to print some text called hello world. So functions we're not going to get into until next week. But for now, just keep this in mind that what we're doing here is we're executing a function. We're executing a command. We're telling it to do something. And what we're telling it to do right now is print this line of text. So part of that is we're going to create what are called variables and constants, or in this case, they're called values in Kotlin. We're going to create those two things, and we're going to print some of those. And bear with me for a little bit because it might be confusing if you've never worked with programming before or with object-oriented programming. So just kind of work through this and I think it'll make sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is write the word val. And val stands for value. And if I go back to my basic syntax page, right here we have read-only local variables defined with val. They can be assigned a value only once. And this is a particularly complex way of saying we're going to write ourselves a constant. So I'm writing the word val, and I'm going to follow that up with a name. And we can name this anything we want. In fact, I'm going to name this name. And now, because Kotlin is a very smart, very contemporary language, I'm just going to put an equals sign, and I'm going to set it equal to my name. So we have a value. The name that we've given it is name, and its value is Cameron. Okay? Let's write another val. This one will be called age, and we'll have it equal to, let's say, 12. Let's write another value. This one we'll call, let's say, height. That'll be equal to 6.5, something like that. Now, I'm not 6.5 feet tall, but this is a good example of using a variety of different values here. So this word val is the declaration statement. We're declaring what this is. We're saying this is a value that we're creating. The name of that value is the second part of this. And then what it's equal to, or its default value, is set over here. So let's give this a try. Let's try print line, and let's put in name. Notice I don't have quotes around it. Up here we did have quotes around it. That's not important. I'll talk about why that changes here. But for now, we're printing this value of name. So whenever I hit print, what do you think it's going to say? Do you think it's going to say the word name, like how it did up here where it says hello world, so it printed the words hello world? Or do you think it's going to print Cameron? Let's run it and find out. So here's the end of our program. It says Cameron, and it printed the value of name. Let's print another line, and this time we'll do age, and let's see what happens. So this time it printed the age value, right? It took that value of 12 and it printed it for us. So the word val, again, is just establishing that we're going to create this sort of temporary placeholder word here, and we're going to assign a value to it. Now, there's a bunch of different data types, and if I go back to my syntax page, I can see there's a lot of ways to do what we just did. So we were using this middle example where we said val, we gave it a name, and we set it equal to something. This is called type inference, and an inference, right, from science to infer something is to make an educated guess about something. So what we've done here is we've said we have a value, its name is name, and it's equal to this. The type is actually, what this actually looks like is string. This is a string right here. This age is actually an integer, and this height is actually a double. So these different values, these different data types might be a little confusing at first, but basically a string, you can think of that as a piece of text. An integer is a whole number, and a double is a number that has decimal points. All of these get reinterpreted whenever we tell it to print that out. So whenever we say print name, it's saying, okay, take that string called name and print it. What's the value of it? It's currently Cameron, so it prints it. So if I go back to this syntax over here, the next part that we have is something that says variables, var. So val represents a constant value, a value that doesn't change in our program, and var represents a variable value. You might be familiar with the term variable from math. The most traditional variable used is x and y, right? If we have something like x plus 3 equals 7, what's the value of x? Well, it's 4. So we're doing the same kind of declaration. Now here we're saying var, and let's have one called name variable. Notice I'm typing like this. This is called camel case. Some people also call it like snake case. There's a bunch of different names. But we don't want to have a space here. We want to make sure it's one contained word. So name variable, we're going to just set it equal to, let's equal it to Cameron again. Let's do an age variable, and we'll have it equal to 12 also. Now this time, these values, because they are variables and not vowels, so they're vars, not vowels, they will allow us to actually change them, to mutate them, which is the phrase that you'll see often used. In fact, if I go back to this page, we'll see things that are like immutable values or mutating values. It just means changing or not changing. So let's say we have print line, and this time we do something like name variable plus, let's add to it. Let's add my last name as well. And let's see if that works. I'm going to hit run. And we're going to see if that runs. And it does. It runs over here and it adds that last name to it. Let's say on the line afterwards we print that name variable again. Let's see what its value is. You might think, oh, its value is Cameron Buckley right now, but we're going to see if that is in fact true. Remember, these are all running in order, so we're running from the top down to the bottom. So we're going to see that Cameron Buckley, and then we're going to see what the line after that says. So we can see that it did in fact print just Cameron. So the value of this is still Cameron. So what if instead of saying plus Buckley, let's do something like this. Let's write, I'm just going to eliminate this line. I'm going to write name variable plus equals Buckley. And let's add a little space around it so that there's some spacing. And now what's going to happen is we're going to have this name variable. And remember, this is a variable. It's not a val. A val up here or value, this can't change. This is always just going to say Cameron. But this one down here that we've declared as a var, now we can add to it. So I just did a plus equals, which means add to and set it equal to this. So it should say Cameron Buckley whenever we run it. So let's run it. So it successfully printed Cameron Buckley, both of those things. So what I'd like you to do for this first assignment is you're going to learn about how to add strings and variables and values and things together to create a little biography. And you can think of it almost as like a form fill-out system where you might have, you ask, like a Mad Lib, where you ask for someone's name, their age, like, give me a noun, give me this stuff, and people fill that out, and then whenever you hit run, it would put it and insert it into different parts of a paragraph. So that's going to be your first assignment. You're going to build it on REPL, and then to share it, you're just going to simply hit share, and you can share the link directly.